Imagine the following scene. A peaceful small town, everyone knows each other, neighbors greet each other on the street. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Suddenly a brutal crime happens right there, in front of everyone's eyes. I think everyone has heard this story before, right? Just watch. On March 19th, 2014, a teenage girl just 16 years old was found lifeless in her own bedroom. What the police found there was something truly shocking. Shocking enough to leave even the most experienced investigators shaken, jaw-dropping in the face of that. The girl's body had 65 stab wounds, 65. And the scariest part, everything indicated that the killer was someone very close to her. Little by little, the investigation starts to reveal a tense plot, friendship, envy, and arguments that began on social media and ended in a very tragic way. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome everyone, and this is the story of Anel Alvarez. If you like real stories, subscribe and follow the channel for weekly episodes like this. Becoming a member helps me a lot, but if you can't, that's fine. Even a like or a comment, even an emoji really helps. Deal? That's settled. Announcements done. Let's get to the facts. I introduced at the beginning of the episode the victim Anel Baez, that scene where she was found. Now I need to introduce to you her friend, her best friend, Erandy. Just like Anel, Erandy Gutierrez was also born and raised in Guamuchil, which is a small city located in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. Anyone who knew this girl in her childhood remembers a calm, studious girl who never gave her parents any trouble. Nothing suggested she was capable of anything unusual, let alone something violent. No one ever thought that. In her teenage years, Erandy had friends like any other girl her age from the city, but one friendship in particular stood out among all the others. Her friendship with Anel Baez. The two were practically glued together, inseparable, like two peas in a pod. They spent entire afternoons together, took pictures, laughed, shared secrets. Typical behavior of two teenage best friends. It's that kind of friendship where everyone looking from the outside would say, oh, they're going to be friends forever. But over time, that relationship started to change. Small differences, well, small in quotes, right, started turning into arguments. Comments started circulating on social media. You know how it goes, right? When someone is offended, sad, or hurt by someone, whatever it is, they go and vent on their stories, right? That's right. And that friendship then, which seemed indestructible in the face of those little everyday things, started to crumble, to turn into something much more complex, full of emotional and psychological layers. Before we get into the details of the crime itself, though, it's really important for us to understand the world these two girls were part of, where they lived. Guamuchil is a medium-sized city, okay? It's in the state of Sinaloa, like I mentioned, in Mexico. A region known not only for the hospitality of its people, but also for something much darker, I would say, the strong presence of drug trafficking. We know that Mexico is a country, unfortunately, very much dominated by drug traffickers. So, in the early 2010s, violence there was almost part of everyday life. Homicides, drug trafficking, robberies. None of that was new to the residents, as bizarre as it may seem. And in the midst of all that, a so-called culture emerged, using a lot of quotation marks, that deeply influenced the local youth, the so-called narco culture. It was everywhere, in the very fabric of things, in the music played at parties, in the way people dressed and spoke in social media posts. So basically, the social identity of a person was being built right in the middle of this pseudo-culture. And one of the young women who most identified with this world was actually Erandy Gutierrez, a friend of our main character. She listened to bands that played songs about this kind of thing, right? She attended concerts and even publicly expressed support for figures connected to drug trafficking. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? In one of her tweets, she posted in February 2014 that she supported the march to free Ovidio Guzman, El Chapito, son of the famous El Chapo Guzman, pwede niyo so por pwede ayon door na You know, a very famous drug dealer, right? With television series about him, anyway, series that supposedly show his biography, her friend Anel was very different from that. In fact, that's why their friendship started to fall apart, isn't it? Anel led a much quieter life, focused on her studies, school, family, and also her closest friends. She didn't get involved with that kind of culture and didn't let herself be influenced by dangerous things either. She had her head on straight, didn't she? Those differences, which at first seemed small, started to create a gap between the two friends. And that contrast, let's say, was one of the elements that would end up contributing to turning that friendship, which was good for a while, into something tragic. After all that, after how the environment started to build walls and fences between the best friends, we then arrive at the day when everything changed forever, March 19th, 2014. It was an ordinary Wednesday there in Guamuchil. But on that day, something strange happened. Anel didn't show up at school to pick up her little sister, Ade, like she always did. Her absence drew attention, and soon the school contacted the girl's father, Hugo Baez, asking if everything was okay, because that wasn't like Anel at all, just not showing up. She went there every day. Hugo, the father, at first didn't even imagine the worst. He just assumed his daughter was running late or at an appointment where she couldn't notify them. Maybe busy with schoolwork or even, who knows, taking a nap at home. She lost track of time. Maybe she was sick. Anyway, nothing serious crossed his mind, just a little carelessness from his daughter. But when he went to pick up little Adi from school and came back home around 3 in the afternoon, something already seemed off, because the front door of the house was wide open. At that moment, a father's instinct spoke louder. Something was very wrong. Hugo entered the house calmly and went straight to his daughter's room, which had the door closed. And when he opened it, he was shocked. There on the floor was Anel, motionless and covered in blood. Little Ade, the younger sister beside their father, was the first to see her sister lying there. Despair, of course, took over them right there. The scene was so brutal that it was impossible to believe what they were seeing. When Hugo saw his daughter's body, his whole world simply collapsed, fell apart. Even in shock, he still managed to do what any father would do at that moment. Try, right? A gasp of hope. He quickly grabbed the phone and called emergency services. The screams and the commotion started to draw the neighbors' attention, and they began to gather in front of the house. Within minutes, the tragedy was already the talk of the whole street and soon the entire city. After all, the crime was just too brutal. He was running away from that behavior, from that environment that unfortunately people there were already used to, right? The issue of drug trafficking and everything else, that seemed really grim, folks. A 16-year-old teenager with no involvement in anything wrong, murdered like that inside her own room in a brutal, unimaginable way. The police arrived quickly, secured the area, and started the forensic investigation. The scene was devastating. Every detail was photographed, every piece of evidence catalogued. Medical teams came in to confirm the death and provided the first psychological support to the family, who were completely devastated. Meanwhile, the police were taking statements from neighbors, family members, anyone who could help understand what had happened there. So, at first glance, right, for the police to start pulling the lines of investigation right away. But the shock was so great that the local press, when they found out what was happening, showed up there within minutes. Reporters surrounded the house, interviewed Anel's father, the neighbors, and started reporting everything that was happening. The headlines highlighted everything: the victim's age, the brutality of the crime, and especially the fact that there was no sign of forced entry in the house, which led people to believe at that moment that Anel might have known the person who did that to her. On social media, the topic exploded. Everyone was only talking about that. The whole community was in shock. Hundreds of messages of outrage and support for the family started circulating, and everyone wanted to know who could have done this to Anel. So, the investigation started immediately. When the police arrived, the focus was to document every detail of the crime scene. Forensic experts examined everything: Anel's body's position and nearby furniture, blood stains, scratches on the walls, and even injuries on the girl's hands. showing from the start that she tried to defend herself and fought for her life. Under her fingernails, they found biological traces, fragments of skin, possibly, from the attacker. In addition, there were signs that someone had tried to partially clean the crime scene, as if they wanted to erase what had happened there. Soon, the initial report confirmed that Anel had really been attacked with 65 knife wounds. 65. The force and repetition of the blows showed that it was not a simple impulse, but an act of hatred, probably premeditated. Another point that caught attention was that no door or window in the house had been broken into. There were no signs of forced entry there. In other words, whoever entered that house did so with the victim's trust. Anel probably knew the killer or even welcomed this person voluntarily. She invited them in, and then a crucial clue for the investigation emerged. Some witnesses said they saw, around the estimated time of the crime, a teenage girl with black hair leaving Anel's house. This information became the focus of the investigation. The police then began testing several hypotheses. Could it have been a robbery gone wrong? No, nothing was stolen. A family conflict? Also no. The family was close, with no history of fights. No one in the area, friends, relatives, family members, colleagues. No one had a word to say that could indicate the family had a conflict. Any enemy. No, so maybe a crime of passion. At first, no sign of a complicated relationship, because maybe what comes to mind at first is a romantic relationship, right? Nothing so far. The only explanation that made sense was revenge, suddenly. Jealousy, something personal. And that's when, putting all the clues together, up until then, a teenager probably leaving from there, this passionate motivation, right, a personal motive, that's when a name came up. The name stood out, and it was Erandy Gutierrez, the friend, the best friend. The investigation showed that the two had grown apart in recent months, and mutual friends confirmed that their friendship had soured. Erandy was different. She changed her lifestyle, got closer to the narco culture, as I mentioned before, and started posting some pretty strange things on social media. Messages with a tone of indirect hostility, probably aimed at her friend, and even phrases that sounded like obvious jealousy about something. Besides that, her physical characteristics matched the descriptions of the girl who was seen leaving Anel's house at that time, during the window when the murder is believed to have happened. From that point on, the investigation started to revolve around this name, Erandy, and the evidence that emerged in the following days would make everything even clearer and more frightening. With the name in mind, the investigation dug deeper into the details. Now, the police's goal was to turn a suspicion into a solid accusation. In the days following the crime, the investigators cross-checked everything they had. Statements from neighbors, reports from friends and family, and most importantly, social media. That's when the first confirmations began to emerge. A security camera, also from a nearby store, recorded a young woman with features very similar to Erandy Gutierrez, walking hurriedly around the area at the same time as the crime. This image further increased the already strong suspicion. With that, Erandy's profile began to be analyzed more thoroughly. The forensic experts began to search through her old posts on Twitter and Facebook, and what they found was quite alarming and frightening. Messages that at the time seemed like just teenage rants, you know, those things that teenagers kind of rebellious post, right? But after a while, those things started to sound like actually threatening. I'll give you an example. On February 5, 2014, she posted, "I will bury him before the year is over." On February 23rd, she said, "I may seem calm, but in my mind, I've eliminated you 3 times. There's more. On March 3rd, 2014, she posted the following, "Maybe not now or tomorrow, but soon. I assure you there will be nothing left." These isolated posts like this, right? You'll say, that's just teenage stuff. But they were made just a few weeks before the crime, which led the police to conclude that Erandy had that growing inside her, maybe planning a real attack. The tone of resentment, anger, and bitterness showed that there was a strong emotional motivation behind everything that was about to happen. There were also other confusing, disturbing sentences, okay? Look at this. Good thing no one hears what I think. She also posted that in February on the 14th, okay? There are 7 billion people in the world, and I only like 3. She posted that in March. At first, some investigators thought they were just typical teenage phrases. But when they cross-checked the dates and the context, they ended up realizing that those posts seemed like emotional preparation for the crime. You know, something that keeps brewing in your mind, building up courage, reasons, mental reasons, right? Like that, a mind that won't stop. You know the saying, an idle mind is the devil's workshop? That's it. When interviewing Erandy's friends, they all confirmed the same pattern. She and Anel had grown apart, and Erandy showed a lot of jealousy toward her friend's popularity and charm, as her friend was taking a more assertive path, let's say. Some classmates said that she was bothered by the photos Anel posted on social media and even said she felt humiliated, which has a connotation there that because Anel didn't go down the path she wanted, she got really pissed off. Really pissed off because her friend wanted to stay in the life she always had, right? So there's a sense of jealousy, of obsession, right? Don't you think? Comment here for me because like, what's up with that? Humiliated by what? Because her friend didn't go? So subconsciously you realize the trouble you're entering and want the other person involved too, right? Can you follow this? Right? It's sort of like that, isn't it? So with this in mind, that's how a possible motivation emerged. Erandy believed that Anel had even shared intimate photos of her in 2013, a year earlier, right? Something that Anel's family always denied and that was never proven by the police either. But for the investigation, what mattered at that moment was that jealousy and anger seemed to have turned into something much more dangerous, a murderous instinct. And now everything pointed to the inevitable conclusion. Erandy was not just a suspect, she was the main suspect. While the police gathered concrete evidence against her, the Baez family, the victim's family, was living a real nightmare. Hugo, the children not only had to deal with the pain of losing their sister, their daughter, but also with something that made everything worse, which was the exposure of the case. Anel's case appeared in newspapers, websites, and on social media, with new rumors and accusations surfacing constantly. And the family, already shattered, could barely breathe amid so much tension. I'd like to pause here, since that's why I sometimes avoid discussing recent cases. It's all very speculative, isn't it? The last one I did like that, when there was all that craziness of reporting things, was about the guy from Interlagos, right? Did you see how much has changed? The one about Larissa Rodriguez too, right? That her husband and mother-in-law poisoned her there. Things keep changing and happening. So take a breath, wait for the investigation to make its report, to finish the inquiry. So we present it, or else it remains speculation. It's complicated, right? For those who are in the eye of the storm. But anyway, guys, moving on here about Anel's case a few days after all that, right? From all the investigations, all the evidence already gathered by the police, Anel's wake was held and hundreds attended to say goodbye, right? Everyone in the city knew and cared about the girl, knowing she was a good person. But something at the wake caught people's attention, right? It even made the atmosphere really heavy. Erandy and her mother showed up at the wake to offer their condolences. Nothing is said about the mother. I assume she was deceived as well. The presence of the friend was a shock there because many were already there, right? This rumor was already going around. Some information had leaked. So many people knew she was already the main suspect for the police. Still, there she was with her head down, right? Wearing long sleeves, covering her arms and hands. But the tension at the moment she walked in was even palpable. In this quiet, so-called sad setting, one of the case's most remarkable moments occurred. As Anel's coffin was watched, authorities arrived quietly. No sirens or commotion. They just walked up to Erandy. And right there, in front of the family, classmates, and the whole community, they put the handcuffs on her. The arrest of a teenager at her best friend's funeral became national news. The mix of friendship, betrayal, and violence gave the case a tragic, almost cinematic aura. At the police station, Erandy remained calm, denied everything, and said she had nothing to do with that crime. But the evidence already spoke for itself. And all of Mexico wanted to know what had really happened between those two friends who once seemed inseparable. The case was taken to the juvenile justice system since Erandy was a minor. Thus, in June 2014, the First Instance Court of Culiacan analyzed the evidence, the knife, the testimonies, and the threatening messages, and sentenced Erandy to 7 years of detention at the Juvenile Detention Center in Culiacan. But the story doesn't end there. A year later, in June 2015, the judiciary of Sinaloa annulled the decision on a technicality. The case should have been tried in Los Mochis and not in Culiacan. Meanwhile, Erandy remained in custody. All that red tape, right? That legal jargon where you say, wow, but hold on. Well, but it was judged. What's wrong with the thing itself, right? With the trial itself, with the evidence that was gathered, the proof, the witnesses that were listed. What's wrong with that? Because it was in another district? Man, that's so bizarre. You could even say, no, it was wrong because the law doesn't allow that. Okay, but man, anyway. In July 2015, the case was transferred to the Juvenile Court of Los Mochis, where it should have been. The new hearings brought up the same macabre details of 65 stab wounds, hateful messages, and the context of humiliation on social media that the girl claimed. The prosecution emphasized the seriousness of the crime, while the defense tried to highlight Erandy's emotional vulnerability and also the impact of cyberbullying. After much deliberation, the judge upheld the sentence. Really? 7 years in confinement. But in 2017, there was a change in the federal juvenile law, which reduced this maximum period of confinement to 5 years. And so, the change was applied retroactively to benefit our Erandy. And since she was already participating in rehabilitation programs, she really ended up benefiting from this rule. And so on September 22, 2017, after 3.5 years of confinement, she was released. She could live her life. The news, of course, divided opinions. For some, it was fair that the young woman, had a second chance in life. For others, the early release was an affront to Anel's memory. I was going to wait to ask, but go ahead and comment now. What do you think? A new chance at life for her or an affront to Anel's memory? Who was stabbed 65 times in her own room by a friend she let into her house? Isn't it? Paranoica started imagining things after getting into trouble and wanted the other one involved. The other, thinking clearly, refused. Paranoica threatened, I'll come over and kill you. You see? Comment below, second chance or an insult to Anel's memory? Damn it! The case of Anel Baez sparked discussions all over Mexico about the role of social media in escalating conflicts among teenagers. That really is a danger. On juvenile legislation and the importance of monitoring young people's online behavior closely. And here's a message then, in light of this, for all of us, especially parents and guardians of preteens and teenagers. Do you really know who your child has been interacting with online? On apps you might not know, in games that have chat features. To finish, I leave here a quote from Anel's father, Mr. Hugo Baez, to whom, despite all these years that have passed, we offer our sincere condolences. Look, Anel's father passed away in 2025. He left a phrase that perfectly sums up how everyone feels about this case. The law was enforced, but justice was not. Does anyone disagree with Mr. Hugo? Which side are you on? Second chance or an affront to Anel's memory? That woman's freedom to live her life, right? Because she spent 3 years not incarcerated, right? In those rehabilitation programs. So 16, 17, 18, 19, not even 20 yet. That's today, right? This was in 2017. Now he's probably almost 30, but the question remains, right? Anel's family, you see her poor father has already passed away, right? She has siblings and all that. It's really sad, isn't it? Therapist Space, let's chat in the comments. Thanks for your company. A kiss from the redhead. See you next episode.